Alan Averill. How are you?
I'm all right. I survive. What can we do other than, well, survive?
Exactly. I've been, well, first off, welcome to Damnation Versus. Pleasure to have you. Let's give the listeners a quick sort of rundown of who you are, other than the singer of Primordial, that they'll know you. So you, obviously, frontman of Primordial. If you went to Damnation, you might also seen you fronting Twilight of the Gods. You played with Dread Sovereign. You are now a booking agent, the worst timed booking agent in the history of starting that job. Am I right in thinking you are a co-promoter? Were you involved in Redemption Festival?
Well, yeah, I mean, in a way, it was just based around a Primordial gig that we would play in Dublin every 2 to 3 years. And so, I mean, yeah, you're right. Starting doing booking agency work as probably the worst time ever.
Yeah.
Right.
It's up there. It's up there with starting a restaurant in March. Opening a restaurant in March and becoming a booking agent right as the pandemic hits is fucking shitty timing.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the booking agency stuff was, of course, that I started before the summer last summer, so that summer was full already. So there was no bookings to be had, and then this, of course, creeps up and everything gets moved. So it's the worst possible time really to be doing anything in the music industry generally. So.
Yeah, and well, that leads me on to what you do now, which is you're a podcast host for Agitators Anonymous. You seem, I listen to the podcast, you do a great job here, really enjoy listening, but it sits uneasy with you. You constantly make reference to content creator and how that term even gets you down. The fact that a frontman of a very successful metal band is stuck in a square box, as you like to put it, creating content, albeit good content, but it's not where you want to be. So tell me a wee bit about let's start with the podcast. Tell me about how that came to be and how it's going.
Sure. I mean, I wanted to do a podcast about 4 or 5 years ago and take advantage of being every summer at a festival and speaking to other musicians. Just never quite got round to it. Recorded a few test episodes, that kind of thing. Never released it. But once this thing happened, I realized I need to do this now. And so as soon as the first lockdown happened, within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I'd started the first one. And I mean, it's the idea was to have a sort of wide-ranging kind of you're never quite sure what you're going to get sort of podcast. That was a mixture of politics, gallows humor, sort of daft tour stories, a bit of sex and drugs and rock and roll, a bit of deep dives into historical subjects, a bit sort of all over the place where in my grey matter. And also it was a sense of me trying to deal with the situation that we were in, but still make something that had some worth. I saw lots of other, the idea of musicians then being sort of reduced to trying to do cooking programs and endless guitar playthroughs, and then you're sitting in a room with acoustic guitar. I was never going to do that. So the idea of the podcast sort of format suits me, but yet still at the end of the day, it is me sitting in a room talking. It's a bit removed from obviously music in the sense that me talking and the sort of stream of consciousness that's involved in creating a podcast would suit me regardless of music. But yet at the same time, it obviously, you are a musician who's turned into a content creator. That's the worst part of, for example, having to try and drive numbers on all the channels, because you realize that your music that's more or less what it means. Podcast is a little different. Yeah. But yeah, it goes very well. I mean, I think on all platforms it must be at 75, 80,000 listens now or something like this.
Yeah.
And so I hundreds and hundreds of listens every day, and it grows, and I get lots of subscribers. So it's cool, but it's sometimes it's hard to summon the motivation, but it provides me with a good discipline of something to do every week.
Absolutely. Well, you need some. You started that way back in March. It took me until August before, and I'd never even thought about doing the podcast, but by by August I needed something. I'm a newspaper editor, so I'm thankful I've got a job, but it's not the job that I had in February. You know, when I was in an office with staff and dealing with people face to face, I now put out a paper from this box that I live in and have done since March. My wife's salon had to close, my festival get cancelled. Just by August I was like, I need some sort of not only human interaction, but I need some sort of anything creative to be anything positive. But I get what you mean as well about the numbers. I think I don't know if you felt the same, but beforehand you can put a cough and a splutter on Facebook and get thousands of views, or you can get in the habit of looking at other stuff on YouTube, and everybody, a cough and a splutters, get 75 million hits. Yeah, when you put something, it's a wee bit like selling tickets for a gig. Actually, you realise when you think about it, someone has to give up their time to come and give you an hour of their time to sit and listen to whatever you've got to say, without any of that advertising it. So yes, when I heard you talking to the chap for Enslaved, and you'd said about the 20,000 streams you'd had or plays through Spotify, I'd never checked my Spotify. Now I've got about 5,000. About a quarter of your episodes. So we seem to be in the sort of same, well, hopeful, the same trajectory. Did you find that folk, as the episodes built up, that the numbers kept coming, or was there bits where it dwindled off? Because this is only 11, 12 episodes in, so I don't really have any sort of context for it.
I mean, once I get to about 15 episodes, it started to have a sort of gradually moving residual effect, because people would listen to one, then they'd binge listen to them all, and you could see that people were starting to go back and listen. So once you have a back catalogue, it does start to move.
Yeah.
And also I became aware of some things people liked more than others. But the idea was that the people would trust me to deliver something that they would find interesting every week. So the podcast is more about, I suppose it's more about me really than the guests. The guests happen every now and again. I don't rely on the guests to move numbers, but of course, video casts move more people on YouTube. I mean, but YouTube is complex because we have to be honest that YouTube views are primarily moved by 6 to 12-year-olds. So that's the nature of YouTube. So, consistently I get 2,500 for a video cast, and they gradually move up. But YouTube is hard to grow a channel now because it's not 5 or 7 or 8 years ago where the play next or the, how can we say, it's not designed for small content like this.
Yeah.
But it's a necessity. But of course, then you have to get a handle on quick movie and processing and rendering in different formats, and so, and you're also probably aware of the fact that when you sign up to your platform to start doing your podcast, there, as of course with all of these things, there's no place somewhere where you can go and go, oh, for 50,000 plays you earn 500 quid and here's how you get it. There's no information anywhere. It's up to you to then try and shuffle sponsors, and that's a whole other ball game,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not even there. I'm not thinking about that, to be honest. As I say, I'm in a position that I appreciate that I've got a job. I'm hoping the festival will be back next year as well. So it's not like yourself that I'm just now stranded. I'm not an artist, that my art's been taken away from me, you know what I mean? So I'm doing it purely, as cliched as it sounds, for the fun at the moment. Yeah. If it was to go somewhere, then absolutely great. I would fit it in amongst my schedule, but I don't see a career about it. Just, I mean, the final thing to wrap up your podcast, the couple of episodes I'd reckon, I like the ones where they're more to the left field, the Cocaine Diaries in New York and the cancel culture. And if you're looking to listen to Agitators Anonymous, there's great ones you can just sort of dip into and get a feel for it. And it's a real talent. I mean, yours aren't driven by guests. Mine's are completely about the guests. I'm just filing questions and hope to have a conversation. So what I used to do in season 1 is have a wee 20-30 seconds intro, and I found that harder than a 2-hour interview, because you try to keep your train of thought and hit your markers, but just rambling away. So credit to you for managing that for a full hour when you're trying to get through some of these stories and not just losing your way.
Yeah, sometimes there's been the odd one where I've written notes. or a vague script, but I don't like following a script. And so very often I do tend to go through the whole thing in a stream of consciousness. Now, of course, I do go onto GarageBand and edit out some funny noises. But generally, if I'm in it, the thing about it is, I find it a bit like singing in a studio, in that if I'm in tired or unmotivated or in bad form, the stream of consciousness isn't going to come the same way. So it's been quite hard in this sort of period of lockdown where you can't, in a way, like, well, it's different than singing in the sense that when you're angry, you can channel that into singing. But doing this, you kind of need to be on form and on game. I was trying to just earlier do a podcast about George Orwell, and I just found my mind just completely wandering after about 15 minutes, and I had to stop. Because, you know, you have to be so involved in that topic that to do it incorrectly seems almost intellectually disingenuous. So I just stopped myself and go, bleh. But then the temptation sometimes is to just ramble and skirt across loads of issues. But some people like that. I mean, I get all sorts of weird messages. People who don't really understand what I'm talking about from really strange countries who like the way my voice sounds.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, yeah. People who tell me they go asleep to them. People who tell me I sound like Dylan Moran, and they like that, this kind of stuff, you know. So
it's odd. It's odd because you have met Paul, who I organise Damnation with. He's a Dubliner as well, but your accent, and it's strange because it's not even your accent. It's just the way you speak. It's very soothing. It's like the noise. It's like the noise of wisdom, right? But what jars with that in your podcast is you're the most miserable bastard on the planet. So you have this fantastically soothing voice. Unlike Paul, she's got a Dublin accent, but it's jarring. You know, it's like annoying.
I know.
In your ear, and you, for whatever, you can kind of find yourself like, you're right, Alan, and you're like, and the fucking world's going to end, and we're all going to die tomorrow. Like, for fuck's sake, where did that come from?
I did always want to put into the podcast an element of black humor, gallows humor, and also to play on my own, the sort of slightly aggravated sense of my own personality, and that's what I'm sort of known for. So I do kind of poke fun at my own miserablism. Yeah. You know, it's not without a sort of gallows humor to it, and I think that people do sort of pick up on the fact that I intended it to be a bit witty or a bit, you know, a tiny bit self-deprecating. But yeah, I mean, you know, there are also pretty dark times that we're living in, and certainly the podcast isn't meant to be the antidote for that for people. I mean, it's supposed to be challenging some difficult things and to try in my own way to make people reflect on some of the things that are going on in my head and things that have been going on in my head for decades, that to try and make people say, like, freedom is not the default setting of society. It's not to make people think about all of the worst atrocities in mankind, but it's also to make them think about, well, where we might be in our own society and all of the things that maybe people take for granted, such as freedom, liberty, you know, which for me, at least right now, very few people seem to be really talking about. So certainly as a podcast done by a musician, I like the fact that it's very at odds with most of the content of most podcasts. And that's seemingly what people like about it and what people tell me. I mean, it's not gonna cheer you up, my podcast.
No, probably. I don't know if the cocaine adventures in New York certainly cheered me up. So if you want a wee bit of banter, then that's the place for that. So let's focus on one of the topics on Spotify. You delved into it a wee bit on one of your podcasts, and one of the takeaway line was that after everything that came out, your 250,000 streams or whatever your band gets per month, you can afford a couple of pints. Now, people might say, well, a couple of pints in Dublin is a month's rent in Glasgow. But joking aside, tell us a bit about how bad is it?
Well, I mean, per stream, I think Spotify is about, let's say, 0.004 of a cent, something like this, or it's 3.9 or something. So realistically, the way Spotify is that it does pay out money, but it pays out money to the very few percent at the top. And so if you pay your 10 or 15 monthly subscription, it doesn't go to who you listen to. And the thing about heavy metal is, of course, again, metal is an anachronism musically in the modern world, and all of the biggest artists in the world now are all, of course, rap, hip hop, pop music people, and so they have songs, of course, that have 300, 400, 500 million or more streams, and if that just tips the scales like a seesaw or whatever. And for bands who only ever use Spotify for promotion, it doesn't really mean anything to them because they never were going to make any money anyway. But for bands like us, who back in the day would have sold enough records that you would have made something, but realistically it was about going on tour, the idea that you could, Primordial, I don't know what Primordial has streamed 15 million times or something, the idea that that, of course, is privy to a contract with a label that you get a percentage of that's divided by 5 and then you pay tax on it, has been probably not worth €500 to me in 20 years of all the albums or whatever. And I have maybe 8 other albums on Spotify as well that have never made me anything. So the problem is it's just weighted, of course, to a very small percentage of people, but those people make an awful lot of money. But the other thing that nobody really talks about is that all the old labels, the Universals and all these kind of people, they bought into Spotify. So they own percentage of the platform and renegotiated a new percentage, which artists don't get any benefit from. So that's why they bought all those old labels like Nuclear Blast, etc., to buy up their back catalogue, which is literally money for old rope.
Yeah.
So old media basically took the soul of, in my opinion, of the Pirate Bay and the soul of the people who made that, and turned it into, well, what it is now. I mean, it's a necessity. So in a sense, so for someone like me, and for most musicians, I mean, you're never going to make anything. The biggest thing about that is that Spotify refuses to link to bands' merchandise pages.
Yeah,
that's the biggest deal. If they could link, if they would allow bands to deal with their own merchandise pages, and I mean, I had this out with actual in real life with Swedish Spotify representatives, and they were just like, that's just not our business policy.
Yeah.
And because
without
there's too many,
without any real reason.
Yeah, well, no, they said there's too many complications legally if you never send the merch. And I said, right, okay, but you link to third and fourth party merch people that obviously kick back to you. I mean, it's the music industry. Music industry has always been rotten. But the problem is, of course, that with the restrictions we live under now, for rock, metal, and punk, and indie, and goth, once you take away the artery of touring, there is no financial recompense for most bands, unless you're going to play games on Twitch against people for money, or you're going to set up a kind of multimedia empire where my whole day basically is sitting here, in front of the microphone, making content, doing vocal lessons, doing blah, 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 blah. I mean, some people would say, well, yeah, that's what you have to do. But that basically, yeah, it's moved you into just being, like I said, that content creator. Yeah. And that's not why I started a band.
No, not at all. I suppose the question people would ask then is, for a band like, not a new band just starting, because they need some sort of exposure in what Spotify offers, but if you're already Primordial, then why bother with Spotify at all? If you can get €15 for your album, why not just try and sell the extra 3,000 albums and make the money that way?
Because you're signed to a label and it's not up to you.
Right.
If you're an independent band, and this is one of the things you see constantly in articles by the mainstream media or the MSM about, the artist. They always talk about Spotify and this idea, the artist gets this percentage. That's because the whole pop music world is it's Cardi B and Ariana Grande. It's one person, one name, Kanye West, blah, blah, whatever. A band is 5 people who have a whole different relationship with a label. They have publishing percentages. They have songwriting percentages. So the artist in a band is, of course, 5 people, not just one dude making electronic music in his basement who just uploads it straight away, or grime stuff or whatever, where they maybe don't need a label the same way. It's for a band with a contract, again, like I said, who are 5 people who, and all the things that go with that. All of these streaming platforms are not designed with that in mind, and I think sort of, I suppose, punish bands over solo artists excessively. But there isn't really any way around it. Every equitable streaming site that's attempted to form doesn't work out because people don't expect to pay for music anymore.
Yeah.
So the transaction then was between a band and their fans was over the merch table. But once that's been removed, which it has been now, there isn't a financial stream for musicians. I think even the train has left the station for bands doing pay-per-view shows on Vimeo or something. I'm personally, I won't play a show to an empty room and put all the stuff on and pretend there's a gig. I just won't do it.
Yeah.
I think I'd rather fucking hang myself than do that. But
it's odd because I was talking to Jeff Walker of Carcass, not for the podcast, but I was asking him to come on, and he had mentioned about just how much the idea of doing a Zoom call for us, it's not, and he was not going to do any like pay-per-view streams or any of that jazz. And it is because he's got that same sort of droll personality as you know, like fucking, I'd rather kill myself than do it. But I can understand. I can understand. You know, it's like some of my favourite bands have done live streams. I haven't bought one because it just depressed the life at me having to sit and watch it. You know.
Yeah, and also people often say to me, "Oh, you know, you'll get a huge merch spike," and you're like, "You don't. You really don't. Right. You get people buy a few things, but again, at the end of the day, you've got to buy your merch somewhere, ship it to the band, post it, send it out, go to the post office here, deal with one of two every 10 are lost, which is your profit margin. So there's no for bands who aren't that big, there's no profit margin. Maybe if Blind Guardian do a pay-per-view show and they print 500 shirts limited just for that show, people will buy them. Bad example, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Again, it's just I could imagine doing a rehearsal where we were filmed in the round and we could talk about the songs and just play, but I would feel odd charging people for that. Again, I mean, I have a Patreon and I feel conflicted about that. In the end, it's actually not a bad thing. It's more like an old school fan club, and people ask me things. We even have like a book club where people are reading books and asking me questions about them, and I post explanations of lyrics. And you can be a patron on it and not actually pay for anything if you don't wish to. So I post loads of stuff up there. But you know, I mean, if this situation is the same for another 2 years, am I really going to be people who are being patrons of you? The payoff is eventually that they get to see you at a festival or a gig, I guess, or get a new album.
Yeah.
But are they just going to be? Heavy metal isn't designed for this, you know. I mean, people are depressed when I say this, but unless things open back up to live shows, I don't see any reason to make heavy metal.
Yeah.
Like I won't make any more heavy metal records. I'll either become a serial killer or a politician, but I won't. And I mean, I'm taking, you know, of course. But there's no, like Dread Sovereign just made a new single dropped yesterday. Dread Sovereign's it's meant for playing live in a small bar to 100 people. Without that, there isn't any point in that band really existing. Primordial is a little bit different, but at the same time, I said I wouldn't release a Primordial album if there was one ready now.
Yeah.
Because, and this may sound selfish, but there's nothing in it for me. Only this. Chatting to people and interviews, and then, well, you might play a show in 2.5 years or when you're 50 or whatever. I kind of don't really give a, you know.
Well, listen, you're the guy that's behind the Primordial. You and your bandmates, if like you put it out whatever way you see fit. I mean, at the end of the day, no, this idea of it being strong-armed from you to do something.
No,
the idea.
No. It's not that. It's not that. It's that I'm talking about agency and purpose, in the sense that we've no problem making another record. But if somebody said, "Okay, you make another record, but you won't be able to play live ever again," I would go, "Okay, I'll make this one, and that will be the end of it."
Yeah.
Because the traveling and the playing is the payoff for me for making heavy metal.
Yeah.
Of course, being an artist and creating art, of course that as well. But heavy metal essentially is meant to be, you know, this sense of live communality, at least to me. I'm not a person who enjoys the studio that much. The enjoyment for me is stepping out into a stage in Chile or Brazil or something, or Moscow or something. It's not making something in a studio, padding around the same 10 streets and talking to people on Zoom. It's so again, maybe that's just the end of a cycle. I mean, I did a podcast called "That's the End of Rock and Roll as we know it," which of course was trying to again play up to my own miserablism.
Yes.
But you know, the thing about this is that I said what was going to happen in March and April would be happening, which is exactly what's happening now.
Yes. Now, I'm with you, because Damnation took its tickets off sale at the end of April, beginning of May. We were kind of in the same boat now. As depressing as you can be, I'm naively optimistic. I'm a very positive guy. I can't help it. I can see the best in people, the best things. I try not to be naive or gullible about it, but I am an optimistic guy. However, I didn't think there would be live music in 2020. I didn't think my festival would go ahead as early as April, May. However, you've kind of stuck with that trend right till today. Now that there's the prospect of vaccines in the horizon, now that I think there was a Bloodstock posted something earlier today, one of the ministers saying that by spring they were hoping to have festivals back up and running. Now you're still talking about this whole 2.5 years, which is kind of horrifying. Are you sticking to that? This will be immortalised online. Is this the line you're sticking to?
Well, it's complicated. What I meant by that was, now, I mean, obviously, what I said at the start of this was that I think that, and just, to be clear about my opinion about this, my opinion is that, and it was in March or April, is that the participation in events will depend on a biometric health passport. And I said that in April or March, which is for a form of forced immunization. And so in order for you to take part in society, so if therefore an event is part of society, if you don't wish to do it, you can't go. So that doesn't constitute the free movement of people to gather. That's my opinion, which is more political than about vaccinations. Just to be clear about that, of course, I'm not an anti-vax or any of that kind of nonsense. Because immediately people hear that you have some issue or questions with it. That's the kind of thing that they say. It's untrue. I just think that there might be spaced, distanced shows where people will have to be, festivals might have to be reduced in capacity by 80%, 75%. It's just my view of the way the world is, and authoritarianism and control, and that whereas other people see the vaccination as a array of, how we say, positivity, which is fair enough. I see it as the implementation of a digitized, the micromanaged digitization of social control. It has the potential to be that. Now, I hope to be wrong. Let me also qualify that. I hope to be completely wrong and have gone mad, because I'm quite aware that I'm like fucking nuts. You know what I mean? I hope to be mad. And so if but at the same time, you see, there might be events such as, if they conform to the Ticketmaster Live Nation principle, where you apply with your health process pass vaccination freedom. But as for going to see a local band in your pub around the corner, which is the small lifeblood of that, I'm not sure that survives. Yeah. To see 200 people in a bar packed in, I don't know. I mean, again, I have to be, and I've said this continually in the podcast, is that I think everyone has to be aware that when they're in this isolated social structure, they take in all of their information from this screen, and that your algorithm, I constantly talk about this, is that it's been curating your opinions and outrage and emotions for 10 years. Every purchase, every place you've been, everything you've said, everything on your camera, everything goes together for that suggestion that, hey, Alan, read this, or hey, Alan, spend an extra amount of time on this. So I'm perfectly well aware that my pessimistic view of the world, which I always had, is amplified by my own algorithm. I'm aware of that. So, so in the sense that I'm aware of the fact that my overreach with negativity So if I was not aware of it, I'd be insane. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, that's right. Okay, because I imagine that you strike me as the kind of guy who types into Google quite often, when will the world end? You know, I've never typed into Google, so maybe my algorithms maybe showing me happy dogs and cats and fucking vaccines that are going to be miracles. You know, so right.
Well, okay. I mean, I just think that the idea of placing our hands in the freedom of big pharma, just that sentence should not sit well with people.
I don't know if it does. Does it? It's do you know the one thing that it strikes me about the idea of this authoritarian sort of these folk behind the curtains pulling all the strings is all I can see that everyone who's in power is getting fucked over right now. It's like I live in Scotland. The SNP had a ridiculously popular government. I mean, it was the country's yellow. I have friends and family who were the biggest SNP supporters in the world until this year. And now Nicola Sturgeon's getting questions left. What would Nicola Sturgeon possibly have to gain from keeping anyone in any sort of lockdown? And then I see that Boris Johnson is not a popular man. Not that I know that much about American politics, but I'd imagine Donald Trump would have a good shot at staying in there. It seemed as if the economy was strong, everything was going okay, and then some pensioners strolls down through there, and he gets in because everybody's like, well, this guy was such a clown, he allowed to see an opportunity to start talking about drinking bleach. And that's where I'm like, I don't see the world leaders who are benefiting from this.
Yeah, it's a fair. Well, okay, so there's a lot to unpack in that sentence.
This is terrible. This is not what this podcast is about.
It's okay.
I want to talk about music.
I mean, it's fine. That's okay. I haven't been making any music to talk about, really. Yeah, I mean, look, I think you're right in the sense that the idea of a globalist agenda requires so many moving parts. It's like people who say the moon landing didn't happen. That means that 10,000 people must have kept their mouths shut. I accept that. The idea that there's some sort of globalist agenda to what's happening is difficult and complex. But at the same time, I do look outside in my city, Ireland, one of the oldest democracies in the world, and I see almost like a prison state. Yeah. It's an open prison. And we have all of the things that gave us humanity, whether it's, you don't need the list, whether it's comedy, theater, music, eating out, visiting friends, you're not being able to bury your loved ones, not being able to see your loved ones if they're in healthcare homes. There's a tsunami of untested, unchecked screenings for cancer that are coming in 12 to 24 to 36 months. The suicides of young people, sorry to bring your podcast down to this level, but all these things are not being talked about. And it makes me furious because that's when I start to think, okay, so this is what it seems to me to be, i.e. that we never get to level zero. That's my mind is like, because I see, to me, everything is disproportionate. Yeah. And so therefore, if things are disproportionate, why are they disproportionate? And if so, then there must be a reason. Now, is that reason political cowardice, incompetence? Is it a botched response? Is it fear? Is it politicians on the make, afraid of ruining the reputation? Or is it what I just said before, the creeping hand of authoritarianism? Or is it just a fuck up? Or is it just a fuck up?
It's definitely formal, and the reason for listen, everything you're saying, we're both on the same page. My wife's salon's closed, but you can take your dog to the dog groomers. A human can't get a haircut, but you can go and get your fucking dog done.
I don't think you can even do that here.
The newspaper that I edit, we've got a story in tomorrow's edition about suicide rates being up 6% in Scotland. So I'm on the exact same page with you. But when I look at the world leaders, and Downing Street couldn't send a congratulatory text to fucking up to the Americans. It's like the level of incompetence. They're fucking ridiculous. The idea, unless there's a level above them that we are just not privy to, that there's some country that we can't see underwater that's running things, because the clowns that we have involved, the people that we see, are not pulling the wool over our eyes, because if they're doing it, they're dragging themselves through the mud with it.
Well, but I agree with you, but at the end of the day, whether it's malice or incompetence, if it ends up at the same, if it ends up that my life is in the same place, then it doesn't really matter to me, you know.
Of course.
And I just hear that, I just don't hear enough people mentioning, like, you know, I have friends that obviously I love arguing and I love talking about the stuff, but I have friends who just, the word liberty is a dirty word now. It belongs to the alt-right, and I just like, how the fuck did that happen? The liberty, like civil liberty, became this thing, and you know, to me, you know, give me liberty or give me death. It's more important than almost any other agency in human history. And so the fact that people are just like, yeah, but you know, I mean, there are people, they call them luxury hermits, you know, they like padding around all day inside and sitting and watching Netflix. That's not for me. So,
my kids, that's my kids. They're like, they love the lockdown, sitting there with, as you say, the YouTube earlier, sitting in screens watching absolute nonsense. But right, let me drag you from.
Sorry, yeah. You may have to edit this. Yeah, sorry.
No, there's no editing involved in Damnation Festival.
Okay.
This is all going out as it is. So, Ireland, Scotland, the similar population, Glasgow, Dublin, similar populations. How's you're my first Irish guest, how's the scene, the metal scene across there in Dublin and then further afield, or is it much like Scotland, there is only a metal scene in Glasgow and then nothing further afield?
You should have asked me that in 2000. I mean, yeah, I mean, for the last couple of years, it strikes me that the scene that I was most active in was between, or up until the late 2000s, and then, you know, we stopped getting underground bands essentially. I mean, there are good bands from here. There's no doubt about it. You know, you have Malthusian and Death the Leveler, and there's plenty of bands out there. But you know, for the last few years, there hasn't been many local shows. You wouldn't have that many bands from Dublin playing in Belfast anymore, or Cork. And it strikes me that most people who were into metal were now middle-aged. And the scene kind of didn't replenish itself with new people. You know, you'd get young thrash bands and stuff, but they only now realistically have one place to play in Dublin. Well, they did. And so, you know, it's scenes and subcultures like we're involved in, I think are going to find it, are going to find it very hard to survive this.
Yes.
Because clubs on the fringes, maybe I said it to my friend, there's a rockabilly bar in Leipzig that has 50 to 100 patrons who keep the rockabilly scene alive, or psychobilly or something like this. That bar goes, they have nowhere to meet, to go to, then that scene dissipates. And that's pretty much going to be the same for most subcultures, whether they're goth or indie, or I don't know, old school rave or whatever. I suppose you can do an old school rave somewhere in a field somewhere, but metal is no different. And the metal bars, if they slowly shut, then people don't have a place to go. And again, it encourages this sort of luxury hermit metal scene behavior, you know.
Yeah,
but I don't know really. To be honest, it's hard to tell.
I felt that a lot, and especially when I first started, I was looking for a sort of sense of purpose with the podcast as well, and I was talking to a lot of people from the scene, and I talked to tour managers, and I talked to band managers, and I was trying to make that point. Where do these bands go that play the lower stages of Damnation when audio in Glasgow, when it's isn't there? What happens? Where do you get? It was bad enough when luxury flats were appearing across all these sites, but what happens when there is no funding for these places, and then where do we get? I made the point when I was speaking to Dave Hunt from Athrak about and then what happens then? The Paul and I get our, do we see our live music in Bayons and sort of academy tours? Where do we find these bands that play the fourth and third stage and opening the main stage of Damnation? It's absolutely grim.
It's a good question. Again, you may return to the point about the Live Nation Ticketmaster event pass to get you into places. I mean, what something like this does is it purges the kind of it clips off the edges, the things on the outer elements of a city or of society or of a subculture, and so much of it is confusing. But certainly if you were a small rock bar that was managing to survive and have a band play in, you know, provincial second, third cities, I'm not sure how they survive. Maybe they find it easier to survive than the city, because the downtown will die, that the city will, you know, those kind of things won't happen in the city anymore. But then again, I don't know, maybe other people will come up and put up, you know, and fund new clubs. I just don't know if that's where you put your money anymore. Like in Dublin after the crash in '08, you know, the sort of Lehman Brothers crash, you know, kind of thing, the economic crash. We had a lot of kind of art installation, sort of bring your own beer type venue places pop up, and they just, by 2 years, they were all gone, because people just didn't go.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we have to kind of realize is that one of the reasons why, you know, subcultural bars and venues and things die off is because people don't go to them, and that the amount of people who post things about Save Our Venues who haven't been to a fucking gig in years or don't go to local gigs, they just save it for, like, Bloodstock probably will be fine, but your local metal band playing around the corner in the, you know, I don't know, the Cock and Anchor or whatever it is, probably was gone. That's not going to be there.
Yeah, and that's the problem with that is that is where Damnation exists. Damnation exists on those fringes. Oh yes, okay, you can come to Damnation and see Opeth, Mayhem, Primordial, and Alcest, and that might be the bands that sell the tickets. But there's 15 of those bands that you come to Damnation to check out that you don't know about. They are on the lower stages, the black metal, the doom bands, that at the bottom. And the great thing about Damnation and why that's important to me is because the stages are packed. If I was picking up these bands and we were putting them on and they were playing to fucking 8 people and a sound engineer, I'd be like, well, it doesn't matter. I'll just do a main stage. But that's not what happens. I mean, you've played the 4th stage with Dread Sovereign. People go to that stage and they check out those bands. So you take away all these places where these bands where they buff these bands, because you don't go from picking up a guitar to suddenly being on tour with Oh My God. You don't get that. So we need this to survive.
The other problem is, though, that I mean, an awful lot of the metal scene that relies on the summer festival season, it's dependent on flights, it's dependent on airlines, and so for a band like Primordial, who would pull, let's say, 500 people in Germany a night, if there's a 20% audience cap on the venue, that means the venue has to be fucking huge, and there's no finance in that. So for bands who have to fly into festivals in Germany and France, and then there's extra costs of whatever these biometrics are, it remains to be seen what sort of economy there is, and if the venues are allowed to be filled to capacity. Because for a touring band like Marduk or Vader or Rotting Christ or Watain, I see behind the wall behind you or whatever, who rely on 400 to 600 people a night across Europe, if those venues are capped, there's no economy in that tour for them, and so that changes things as well. Again, it's all stuff that remains to be seen. I mean, like I said to you, it might be by next September that this is just, you know, people can fucking mock me and poke fun at me and go, look, you were far overreaching in your pessimism, and things are back to some kind of normality. And okay, I perfectly accept that. But again, like a band like Primordial has to fly abroad to play. Yes. And at the moment, there's a 14-day quarantine rule upon returning from anywhere. And if everyone has a job, that stops you from leaving the country. I mean, it's designed to stop you leaving the country. Yeah. So unless that's lifted, we're fucked. We won't play anywhere.
Yeah. In terms of Ireland, then, when forget the pandemic, let's talk 2019. How did Primordial sit in the Irish scene? Because the problem is you get bands, Scottish bands that, I mean, you get a lot of English bands that are not really well thought of in England. A lot of Scottish bands not well thought of and don't pull massive crowds in Scotland. How are Primordial seen in the Irish scene?
I mean, we're seen as probably the biggest band, the oldest band, the band who played, I don't know, the people Ireland would go to Grass Pop and then go, oh, Primordial are on the second stage, or Vacan. And I mean, as for within Ireland, it's hard to say because it's such a small demographic of people, and we play maybe once every 2 years. Maybe
is that a Redemption then? So is that when you guys do your show? What capacity is Redemption?
It's about 800 maybe.
Right. Okay.
So, but we need to stack the lineup. But it's, I mean, there was never any touring schedule in Ireland. We play the odd gig in Limerick or the odd gig in Belfast, but it was always, 200, 250. It's okay. it's hard to say because the demographic is so small. I don't really know. And also, we never were going to be, back in the day, it was never my intention to be a hometown hero. I always hated bands who were like that. So my intention was always to go to other countries. I had no interest in being the band who played in Dublin every 3 weeks or whatever. With no interest in building up an audience here. With no interest. We've never even played a festival in Ireland.
Right, is that right?
Like, we've never even been asked to play a festival. So heavy metal is, I mean, if heavy metal is like the, you know, kind of social leper status, it's really, I suppose, the most profound in Ireland. Ireland is Indian pop music culture, or you know, heavy metal was, you know, most, if you go to a festival in Belgium or Germany, there might always be a few metal bands if it's a pop festival, or Paradise Lost are playing, or it's Beast Milk or whatever. Ireland never had any sop to anything that was popular or even trendy in the metal scene, or playing any of the normal festivals. Like you would never see, wow, fuck, Alcest are playing, or it just doesn't work like that, you know.
Yeah, it's strange though, because like we get a good, Damnation gets a great turnout from Ireland. We've got a,
yeah.
What's that about? Or is that just the Irish travel for fucking everything?
Yeah. And also, well, I mean, there isn't anything in Ireland really. There's you know, you can go and see Overkill and Destruction. You can go and see, you know, Opeth and whatever, and they all they do well, you know. They'll do 800, 1200, 1400 people, but there's no like weekend where you can go for a festival and you know, and see 12 or 14 bands or whatever. There's nothing like that. There never has been, except maybe 15 years ago, but it's even then it only got 200-300 people. I suppose every scene needs active and passive people, and we never really had enough of either to fill out like a 1500 venue or anything like that. It's hard for me to know because I suppose I've been somewhat removed a little bit the last few years. You know, there's one or two pubs people go to in the city, and you know, you'd go to the odd gig here and there. But you know, when you're 20 years old, you don't want to fucking hang out in the same place as people who are middle-aged. It just never worked like that. So it's a bit different. I have no idea. I was always more interested in, I was just like, you know, Primordial has to get to Germany, to Norway, to Sweden, to Finland. I mean, I would turn down a gig in Galway to go and play in fucking Mexico. I mean, why would I, you know, 120 people in Galway? Forget it. I just wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, well, I would do it, and maybe I was, you know, but my ambition was always to not be the sort of, Irish people can be a bit, the parochialism of Irish society limits our ambitions sometimes.
Right, okay. And I think that's extra credit to Fergal Holmes then. The guy I suppose takes it in the chin for Ireland and across there and puts these shows on.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, you know, H runs a tight ship and it's all well oiled and it's it runs very well. And his, you know, they would put on Overkill and Destruction and something. Yeah, there'd be like 600, 700 old thrashers there. So, I mean, it's not like the shows don't get people.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure if a scene is really just everybody who's 35 to 55. I'm not really sure if that is a scene or not.
Yeah, it's just people are going, all the same crowd are going to all those shows because, well, I take it if you're only really counting one promoter to bring them there, there's only so many hits you can take before.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's not, I suppose I would have had my hands more involved when I was 30, 35 or something like this. So a bit less these days, but I don't know. I'm not, like I said, I'm not sure what comes out of this or what survives.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk Primordial then. So you and I crossed paths after, I think since 2012's Damnation, no one has appeared at Damnation more often than you. You've been there 5 times. You've played 3 times. Like yeah. 3 times with Primordial, once with Twilight of the Gods, and once with Dread Sovereign. So is that just happenstance that you tend to be there? Or do you like the festival? Is there any... Tell me a bit about how people talk about Primordial shows like in the UK, like there's some rare hidden gem. Yeah, I see you every goddamn year, so tell me.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Primordial is that we never... It's a long time since we did well, not that long. We would maybe do a tour of 3 days in the UK, and that might be it. I mean, we used to get a lot of people would message us looking for provincial small shows. But I think the nature of festivals is that you can, of course, reach more people. And of course, the proximity between Ireland and England makes it easier in relation to flights, gear, all that kind of stuff. It's, oddly enough, playing in the UK was one of the first places we developed an audience in the early 90s. Like, for our first gig in London was 94. So, and we hadn't even released an album yet. We played in the back of our demo with Occult and Balsa Goth and in London in 1994. So, like, we have a long history with coming over for, you know, random gigs here and there. Played with Mayhem in 97, Cradle of Filth in 96, Gorgoroth, that kind of stuff. So I think it's a geographical proximity thing. But I think the days for most bands of doing 6 to 10 to 12 day regional shows in the UK, that doesn't really seem to happen anymore. Although I will say this, I've been really surprised with really good shows in that wouldn't have happened 10 or 15 years ago in like Manchester, and we played in Leicester and a few other places, and that was cool.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Again, I've no problem with any of it, but it's probably a geographical thing.
Yeah, because you've got a tour coming up next year, or well, would have been happening next year with Rome, and that there's no UK dates. So
it's cancelled anyway. So.
Right, well, that cancelled tour, that should it ever be rescheduled in 2025? So there's no UK dates now. What's the reasoning behind that? Is the money just not there, or?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if I was supposed to say that, but I think everybody knows that any tours before next summer will be cancelled anyway, anywhere. I think that it depends on Primordial Moonsorrow. Maybe in London is more popular than Primordial Naglfar, Rome, and so the money involved in bringing. Don't forget, you've got ferry costs, which seem to just go up and up and up. You know this, every year, and so for whatever reason, it seemed to be. To not make any sense to go across and back, like, because mostly people want you to go to the UK, kind of maybe go up and play 3 or 4 dates and then back across. But of course, if that means you earn less money for the people organizing it than playing in Austria, Switzerland, and you know, Bavaria or something, they're going to just send you to Austria and Switzerland. Again, it has little to do with me. I think though that the rescheduled tour may have dates in the UK in it, but having said that, it's probably easier for us to fly in to do a one-off and someone else to fly into London than, you know, the cost of bringing the tour bus across.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it depends. And also London is a fucking nightmare to bring in with a tour bus and a load. And well, no, that's not a reason. I don't really know, to be honest. To be honest, it's this year has been such a fucking mess that every gig that's arranged for next year, I expect to be cancelled. And so when promoters keep asking me and hassling me about, will you promote this on your page? I'm just like, okay, what's the fucking, you know, I mean, anything before next September, I'd say September will go. So I think next summer's festival season is going to be a bloodbath of cancelled festivals. And also untaken flights, which is, yeah. So, I mean, that's just, again, my pessimism speaking. Maybe by March it'll be all sorted out. I don't know. But it's, I haven't paid since, like, as soon as all this stuff started, I couldn't have told you the routing of that tour next April because I expected it to go.
Yeah.
Within 2 weeks of this happening in last April, I expected that in April to go. So as soon as that happens, I just sort of couldn't give a fuck. In the sense that it would only make me even more depressed to look into all the details and then go. And, you know, well, that sounds pretty pessimistic, but...
No, if it's the truth, it's the truth. I mean, so 90% of this podcast listeners are from the UK, so when they would have seen you large, I mean, fucking 90% of them would probably have seen you at Damnation. I'm sure you have played Bloodstock, and you haven't done Download? No.
I don't think they'd pay us anything. And you know, there's no economy to get us there with any gear or anything. No, I mean, we've over the last 5 or 10 years, we've played quite, club shows in Liverpool and Manchester, played in Glasgow, played in Leeds, played in, not Leeds, played in Leicester, played in London, obviously. So there's been shows, but I think people have to realize that the days of like maybe 2000 when Rotting Christ and us played like 7 days in the UK and bands came to second and third, size provincial cities they were gone.
Yeah.
Now they may return because maybe, when I was thinking about what I was just saying there earlier, is that maybe in second, third and fourth size cities across Europe, they may be less hit with the economical pressures of a major city. And so therefore, instead of going to the clubs that are all gone in Hamburg or Munich, you may have to go to Bremen or my brain is trying to think about other answers for the things you're saying at the same time. So I don't know, I mean, at the same time, you're in a metal tube traveling around Europe. How is that going to be in this circumstance? Are you going to be allowed to travel to all those places which may have different estimations of the sort of health pass?
Yes.
I don't know why I did that, but
No, but people can watching, so people can watch, so they'll see the rabbit ears, right?
Parenthesis, yeah.
Yeah. So you describe when you listen to your podcast as this being your fat Elvis years, but from a promoter's point of view, I don't view Primordial like that. No.
No, I didn't mean that. What I meant is that it's taking the piss out of the fact that I'm sedentary.
Right, I see.
I'm sitting in a chair. There's no movement.
Yeah.
And you're just in the end of your career. It's just me
not,
taking the piss.
Not that you're irrelevant. All right, okay. Because my view of Primordial now is you guys come across, you do some damage at a festival like Damnation. The Damnation sells 3,000 plus tickets, so it's not nothing. And when you guys come and you book Primordial, I've only seen, since dealing with you in 2012, I've only seen your stock rise in the UK, albeit through the very small context that I have of my event. Is that? Do you feel that Primordial are a bigger band now than they were? Forget the pandemic again. We're a bigger band now than they were 3-5 years ago.
That's hard to say. I mean, you go through, you get to a period where you sort of become classic rock, or you become an elder statesman, and everybody could probably say, well, your biggest album is maybe To the Name Is Dead or Redemption, but even though the new ones do well, you sort of enter into kind of elder statesman status where you're invariably going to be at that position at the end of the second or the first stage. And so sometimes it doesn't necessarily have a reflection on how popular the album is for some bands. Obviously, you take a band like Alcest, who've just grown and grown and grown and grown, but nobody will probably say that the last Mayhem is bigger than the one that came out 8 years ago or 10 years ago. It's difficult to quantify. I think for a band as going as long as we are, you pass into, sort of kind of elder statesman status. I mean, it's difficult to remain entirely, trends come and go, and younger people are interested in different bands. So, it's complicated. I suppose we are. But at the same time, I could probably say that maybe it's difficult to quantify, I think, is the best answer. But you're probably right,
Well, let's just say I'm right. That'll be the first time this podcast. So
yeah.
Magic, right? We'll wrap up Primordial before we get to cancel culture, which will take a serious downturn and probably right up your street and not up my street at all. So sure. Tell me something about Primordial. Give me a highlight over the years, something you've went and experienced where you've been like, "Fuck me, man, this is actual rose shit."
Well, I mean, I'm glad to say that there's tons of highlights. I mean, we very rarely get poor gigs. We very rarely get poor reactions to the albums. We stayed together, the core nucleus of the band, for so many years and remained friends. And yet the band was never our, sole employment or our job. It never became routine. So I think the thing I'm most proud of the fact is that you have to be, I think when you're being creative or being artistic or making music like this, is the ability to be able to step outside the bubble of what you're doing and think to yourself, does this still sound like it has energy and passion? Does it still sound vital? And I think the fact that after 9 albums, 10 really, that you can still listen to it and go, here's a band who still sound like they mean what they say. That's the most important thing for me, I think. That it never sounded like we were treading water or we sounded like we were tired or jaded. And I never lost my energy or enthusiasm or, if anything, my ability to want to make the music more dark or more vital, whatever you want to say, we just redoubled all the time. So I think the most important, the thing that means the most to me is to have kept integrity and also to have, through sheer bloody mindedness, never deviated from the path that we sort of set out for ourselves of not compromising things. And also still make each other laugh and have a good time traveling somewhere. Yeah. Now, okay, for me, I would have liked to have toured more. Just playing 4 dates in South America isn't enough for me. I want to be there for a month or two. But, it's life that it throws up responsibilities in different ways for different people. And also the fact that your band is not what you make a living from anymore. So everybody has a whole lot of other set of responsibilities. Yeah. So, yeah, just, sex, drugs and rock and roll.
I know, I was going to say everything has to be so fucking thoughtful and meaningful with you, didn't it? You can't just be like a big bag of coke and a threesome. There's there's no levity with you. There's no respite.
Yeah. Well, I don't kiss and tell, so, but there is all that stuff as well. I don't really talk about it in the podcast, but that's for my diaries when I'm maybe 70 or something.
Oh, good. Listen, it's a weird one because with this podcast, with Nathrak, with Orange Goblin, with Boss, with these bands, I book all these bands and I've never had this conversation. I've never had a conversation with MD. You come and you're tuned into what you're there to do in Leeds.
Yeah.
I've got an earpiece in and getting fucking shit for Opeth and Mayhem all day. It's so, like...
Yeah, but I mean, luckily enough for me, when I go to Damnation, there's some people I always see, whether it's I enjoy having a chat with the same driver. Like I remember people or the same crew guys or the same people. And I think it's always a kind of courtesy to at least, of course, at the beginning, introduce yourself to everyone and remember like, oh yeah, we had a chat about fucking Man United and Leeds the last time. And I like sort of catching up with just the folk who help out with the festival, or you get to chat to Becky or whoever's around or Gomez or whatever, or of course, Ben or, all those guys. And so I will always look at the lineup of the day and go, oh, fucking cool, they're there. But I like mooching about and hassling the people who are working there and saying hey and stuff. I think it's always been very important with the band to, I think, just be very, how can we say, respectful and observant of the amount of effort that goes into making something like that happen.
Yeah, it definitely does.
While also still having a laugh and hassling people for an extra bottle of whiskey. And
absolutely, well, that's the job. And because last thing in Primordial though, because you also tour manage Primordial.
I suppose so. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have a tour manager, so you are the guy who is hassling for that bottle of whiskey or needing that extra hotel room or the driver to show up. So.
Yeah. Sometimes.
Sometimes. Right. Okay, that was the fun part of the podcast over. Now, cancel culture.
Okay.
A couple of things I want to say right off the bat for the people that are going to try and destroy me, cancel the festival, cancel me, cancel my fucking career, cancel my kids' lives, anything that these guys they want to do. I know that no good will come from this conversation. That there is no winning this argument. There's nothing that I can say that's going to change the folks' minds who are into this form of cancelling anything that they don't agree with. So that's my first point. My second point is I'm not saying that I'm right, and I'm not saying that the people that are saying that are wrong. I'm saying that between 1 and 10, there's 2 through 9, and we can all sit in different. We can all have there's a big grey area and a lot of nuance, and not everything has to be fucking I'm right, you're wrong. So if you don't agree with Mgła being booked for Damnation, I understand that. I understand your point of view. I just don't think that me having a different opinion is wrong. So do you want to quickly encapsulate your thoughts on cancel culture? And then I'll get into a bit of that, the specifics and tangibles of what happened with myself and Mgła.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's symptomatic of the age that we live in, that we are at the end of a 10-year cycle of social media derangement. I think we can easily say that has amplified and polarized people to the extent that they are set into religious. When something, how can I say, when something ceases to be an object of reason and becomes an article of faith, then you can never reason or rationalize with that. I mean, so people who are caught up in a religious movement, like a crusade to cancel everything that they see as disagreeing with them, it's almost like arguing with a flat earther to say, you should prize reason, rationality, and freedom of speech. As I said earlier, to a lot of people, freedom of speech isn't important anymore. And because many people on the new left, let's call them that, not the old left, which I understand and would have seen myself as part of, healthcare, housing, rent, education, all that kind of stuff. The new left, which is identitarianism, I think that there is a belief that anything that doesn't fit their particular agenda of how the world is obviously, fascistic or whatever. But what this polarized nature of the argument does is it destroys any middle ground. It destroys nuance. People are nuanced, and they have different, wildly different beliefs on different things. And it also, a lot of it is just simply about extending or exerting power. It's about bullying. It's about people feeding off the sort of collective mob rule narcissism that's involved in bringing someone down. And people, I think at the heart of it, some people just really genuinely believe they're doing the right thing. Yeah. But for me, standing up against free speech can never be the right thing. The only antidote to bad speech is daylight or sunlight, as they say, disinfectant to something. And nobody wants no one really wants nuance. They don't want debate. They don't want rationality. They don't want anyone to sit in the middle of an argument. And they certainly, it's a rather anti-intellectual exercise that's rooted in many of the worst aspects of human nature that are amplified by social media, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well,
another complicated answer, but
no, of course not. That's the point with this. This is not an easy subject. There was part of me that was like, did I even broach it? Because do you know the tiny percentage, the 0.01 percentage that is the cancel culture? If 0.01% of people said that the lineup was shit, or the ticket prices were too high, or it would almost be ignored, and you just thought that was part and parcel of business. But that 0.001%, especially on Twitter, can become 50 or 60%.
This is the problem, is that the nature of what social media is and what it represents is that it weaponizes those people it weaponizes a very small percentage of people who don't speak for the majority of people. And because of the pressure that even half a dozen people online can exert on any festival, and the onus of truth is not on the people who accuse anyone of anything.
Yeah.
There's no such thing anymore as due process, the intellectual due process, because everything is so instant. And it's armed and weaponized. Like one person, if they are really, really wound up, can probably cancel a band's entire festival career by just, weaponizing X amount of posts every day. Absolutely. And nobody reads into it. Nobody, like, I know Mgła, I know those guys. And so I've had conversations with them about this kind of thing. But I doubt anybody who's accusing them of this or that has ever discussed anything like this with them. The other thing about it is that if we're all to be, one of the things that I find fascinating about cancel culture is, and this is the one thing where it differs from the religious, is that there's no sense of forgiveness to it. There's no sense of redemption. And that's one of the things, that's one of the things that's the darkest about it, that shows us, to me, the kind of intellectual cul-de-sac of modern society, is that most movements throughout history allowed for people to redeem themselves. They allowed people to forgive. They allowed people to make amends. I mean, if I'm to be hung for the things I said when I was 18 and now I'm 45 years old, you're a boy. You're not the man you are now. And
I want to set the table for this, because we're getting into the weeds a wee bit with it, and there's a lot of folk listening that'll be a bit like, well, one, what the fuck are they talking about?
Oh yeah, sure.
And so this is how this came to be. I've been trying to get Mgła. Mgła are one of the most popular, most in-demand bands in the last 5 years. I'd say My Dying Bride, Alcest, Mgła. There was a lot of man. I'm not massive on black metal. I certainly don't deep dive. I've got a demanding career and 3 children. I don't sit on the internet reading about people's past for 20, 30 years ago. So,
sure.
20 years ago, one member of this band apparently released 100 cassettes, and on those 100 cassettes, one of the songs was called Free of Jews. That's the sum total of everything that's levelled against. People want desperately to pin this narrative of the play with clandestine blaze, but that's whether you believe in guilt by association or not. Nah, I'm just not buying into guilt by association, and not because then we're all fucking guilty of everything, aren't we? I mean, everybody plays in a 5-a-side football team with a bigot, or somebody's been to their wedding with a racist uncle. I mean, you're fucked if you start doing that. So that's the be all and end all of what's levelled against Mgła. So I booked them.
Yeah.
I knew exactly what I was doing at the time. Before they were announced, I read, I'd done so much research in Mgła, it kind of made my head hurt. I contacted Fergal Holmes in Ireland. I contacted Stephen Moss in England. I contacted Joe McGregor in Scotland, all promoters that will put them on. I contacted the band directly and spoke to their management. I exhausted everywhere I could go. Is this band a dressing room racist band? Is this band that I've kind of managed to hide it for 20 years? But it wasn't it. Anyone who had dealt with them, anyone at all who dealt with them, they're saying they're not racist. Nothing's happened with this particular band. You're referring to something that happened with one member of the band 20 years ago. And sure. Although they've never come out and publicly stated that, being a journalist myself, I can understand why you wouldn't, because as soon as you do, you give the proper publications, the Crangs, the Metal Hammers, the Terrorizers, Zero Tolerances, they've now got an in. They're not just going to buy into the gossip mongering that the fanzines are doing. So now they've got into Mgła deny racist allegations. So now that's what I would do as an editor of my paper. As soon as I had something stood up by the band themselves, I would tackle that story that way. So I could see why that would happen. I announced that announcement and Facebook. I checked yesterday before coming out to chat to you. The post had an 83,000 reach, 350 comments, and one person asked the question, "Awesome band, can someone clarify if Nazis?" And someone said they are. And that was it. That is all that ever happened. And one or two people get so worked up about it that they went to the Leeds Anti-Fascist Network. They contacted the venue and said that Mgła would be singing for them. And this guy was part of this project as of today. This was all happening. The links that were getting sent within 2 paragraphs were commenting in bands that had nothing to do with Mgła, saying they will be selling explicit merchandise in Leeds with racist slogans on it. I mean, it was exhausting. And there was a period about 48 hours before the venue read into themselves like, this is fucking nonsense. This is cancel culture silliness. And I believe also the Anti-Fascist Network, when I responded to them, an anonymous email, no one was good enough to tell me who I was talking to, or they had my email, and I replied with all respect, and it's all there if you ever want to check out the Leeds Anti-Fascist Network. And when they put out my emails explaining exactly everything they'd done and why I knew for a fact that my festival would not be used as a platform for racism, they posted all my emails. And their supporters came in and said, this is cancel culture silliness. This is going to... We've got guys, we've got Tommy Robinson's crew on the streets. We don't need to try and find what some... This guy basically didn't even know what black metal was. but he'd been sold a dummy by someone who was desperate to use his or hers organisation to bring down and cancel Damnation. And that would have been the result. So that's where I was. And ultimately, you played. So this is why I want to talk to you, because not only have you booked and played with Mgła in Ireland, you were also the band that played directly after them.
Yeah.
Again, on the day, with no one saying a single word. No one saying a single word.
Yeah. Well, you know, people don't have hobbies anymore, do they?
Try to ruin my life as a hobby.
That's about okay. There's a lot to unpack in what you just said. I mean, I'm being flippant when I say that, but that is true in the sense that because everyone is spending so much time online, so much time in their echo chambers, so much time having their opinions validated by other people, and a lack of human contact, a lack of human social awareness, social skills, the ability to sort of differentiate things that are in your algorithm are sort of lost in modern society. I mean, if you're going to be, let's put it this way, if you do the lottery every day, every week, when you stop doing it, you feel like you wasted your money, right? And I think that activism is like an opiate for people, and it also validates their existence and it gives them purpose. And if you said to people, well, these guys aren't that, that's sort of, you've taken away their agency. You've sort of taken away their, well, the thing that they enjoy doing, the thing that gives them purpose, which is being an activist. And I understand that as a, as an 18 to 22-year-old or 25-year-old, lots of young people who are angry at the world and also trying to think that they're making the world a better place get sucked into these ideals without really thinking about, again, freedom of speech or whether somebody is this thing or that thing, because most things on the internet are just a kind of a produce of Chinese whispers. They're a produce of hearsay, and that's all that it requires. I mean, I can't speak exactly to Mikołaj's motives for making the music that he made 20 years ago. I can speak for myself of the things I made when in 1993, and probably you can find outrageous statements in old letters from me that somebody could unearth, no doubt, because I joined Primordial when I was 16.
Yeah.
But, you know, to not allow anyone any personal growth, but also to take everything on face value, to never think that, oh, maybe they meant that, who knows, with some sort of gallows humor to it, or to not understand nuance, like maybe that kind of music is industrial music. And if you look back at the history of White House or Sutcliffe Jugend or that kind of music, it's always had that absolutely outrageously extreme imagery. That could be the reason also. But again, reasoning doesn't define this argument. And again, like I said, if you were to say to somebody, well, there's not really any way to diffuse this, you know, because I think people are so wound up and so polarized, and they are, and I wasn't really joking when I said people just don't have hobbies anymore. They spend too much time in their echo chambers of their algorithm, in my opinion. I mean, having said that, when I was 19, I was super fucking angry as well, you know. Well, yeah, different kind of anger than I am now. But.
Yeah, I mean, to play devil's advocate, because I don't want somebody listening to this and then thinking, oh, we can write both us off just because, oh, well, that was a narrative they wanted to do. So you're not the spokesman for Mgła. However, what's your feelings and why they haven't just come out? Because whatever I put to them is, why don't you just come out and say you're not racist? But my argument a wee bit is that, like, you call me a paedophile, I'm not going to come out and say I'm not a paedophile, because now I've just joined the noise.
They did do an interview in Deaf Forever about all of this. They had some shows on a tour cancelled in Europe, in Germany, and they did one interview in Deaf Forever. But the thing that defines Mgła is that they don't do interviews. And also, I do believe that as soon as you give in, you're going to be paying for that for way longer. It's in my opinion, those, you know, accusations of this and that and the other are probably better to ignore. But again, it's sort of, you know, heavy metal in its sense, in its old traditional form, I suppose, is seen as fair game. because it's part of some, you know, it's I suppose, well, I'm not sure I can really say that. It's I think it's like shooting a very big fish in a small barrel, because heavy metal always trying to explain to, for example, punks, that heavy metal adopted extreme imagery in a more fantastical way or for shock value or whatever. Punk or heavy metal never had the political conscience that punk did. And it was always punks who would have been involved in activism by and large, and trying to explain that heavy metal just didn't have that social conscience, and that its adoption of extreme symbols, especially in black metal, wasn't necessarily, you know, it was very often just that, just symbolism. But again, that's an incredibly nuanced, complex argument. I mean, to explain neo-folk to somebody who doesn't understand from the outside, it would appear to be, it's such a strange thing to get a handle on it. Can you explain to somebody like, hey, uniforms are high camp in the neo-folk scene?
Yeah.
That's such a strange nuance, which has sexual undertones that people don't really understand. So I don't know how to explain this to people. Look, if you're going to get mad at black metal, it doesn't really matter what I say or what Mgła say, because you're just going to see it as this force for bad in the world that needs to be challenged. And so, but ultimately, you know, when people try to do this to Marduk, do they make Marduk? What happened to Marduk? The last album went into the German charts at number 10. They played at every festival. More people show up to see them. All their social media went through the roof. People have to realize that it may give you that little shot of adrenaline in trying to tackle these things, but ultimately, generally, you make martyrs of people. But also, I think one thing that's people have to understand is that if, and this is not just really about heavy metal, but if you cancel somebody, like in the complete sense, and you take away their right to make a living and feed their children, you create some very desperate people. You create desperate men, and they will exact a massive revenge on society eventually. If you just go, right, you're done now from having any platform to speak, don't be surprised when they come back to the town square with pitchforks, because there's always a reaction to that action, or they vote for the political party you don't want to be in power, or whatever else.
It was strange. It was strange for me because, like myself, I've tackled racism in the sense of I've been a crime reporter and a court reporter for 10 years before. I've went to a racist store and chapped it and said, can we have a conversation about what you said to that wee girl on the street? I have been in court and waited for people to come out. I've tackled racism in a very visceral sense. Paul is a psychologist who he tries to rehabilitate killers. I mean, like, if we lean any more left, we're going to fall out of Jeremy Corbyn's fucking garden. I mean, it's like, we're not your target, but these guys, for that 48-hour period, because it wasn't so much, I understood for a second that I made a decision to book Mgła, because I know how cancel culture works, and my festival might get cancelled, because I was going to stand my ground trend, which was an odd fucking stance for me, because I don't really give a shit about Mgła. I mean, it's like, they're not my favourite band. There was Opeth were already booked. We were going to sell out regardless. That was not a hill to go and die on. However, I felt within myself, when I had the conversation with Paul and Becky at the time, if I give in this time, this could have been Micah for the woman who apparently made some comments that people tried to level against her. This could be mayhem. It could have been, they could have had that against Or Noir. Like, there's a bunch of, you can go out there and try and dig up something, and that, is this how I promote now? There's everything through the lens of, did the drummer hit his wife once? Did shit, I didn't know 20 years ago that guy was involved in a car crash. Like, I'm a promoter now who's terrified of every booking because of the backlash it's going to get. And that 40, after I'd done it, and I thought what would happen is if one band pulled out, the snowball would start. That as soon as somebody had something tangible to hold on to, and the crowd can gather and be like, fuck it, these guys are Nazis putting on a Nazi festival, Damnation's fucking far right, all right adjacent, whatever crazy terms they use. I thought that was good. And there was a bit, Don Raid and Venom Prison were being targeted by fans saying, how can you guys possibly say that you're anti-Antifa or anti-racist and still play this event? And that's the next question I'm going to ask. So how do you feel about these bands? Did anyone contact Primordial and say cancel Damnation because Mgła playing?
No.
No one contacted Alcest. No one contacted Opeth. No one contacted any of the other bands. But they targeted the two bands. That's the public political stance. So now you're really fucked, because if you don't play any event that features Mgła, TAC, Phil Anselmo, you're playing nothing. You're not playing Hellfest, Vacuum, Brutal Assault, Damnation, Bloodstock, fucking Download, anything. You might as well just give up being a band now. So what do these fans want? And what would your advice be to the bands that are being targeted by them and kind of like, fuck, now you're came to a rock and a hard place?
Well, I mean, again, it's a very complicated question. I mean, if you're going to make politics your main standpoint of your band, then you're probably going to have to deal with the people who are also ascribed to the same politics. But at the same time, I mean, I'm a free speech absolutist in the sense that I think I'm a free speech absolutist in the sense that I think the opposite is far more tyrannical and authoritarianist. And we have to allow bad speech. We have to challenge people that we disagree with. And if you remove the ability to have that debate, then all you do is martyr people on either side and push them to the extremes, which is, of course, what we can see in the modern polarization of society, that people are not able to have interactions where they're able to, sit and talk to each other, or are able to have discourse. And that's one of the reasons why society is in one of the states that it's in, because that discourse doesn't really exist. It really depends. I mean, it doesn't bother me that if an X band want to be X political black metal, that's up to you. But, if you lay out your stall when you're 22, you're not going to be allowed to forget that when you're 35 or 40, if you're going to lay it out being that political. It's hard for me to, how can we say? It's difficult to say. I do think that people need to stand their ground. But I mean, I would say I will defend the right of somebody else's. I will defend the right for somebody else I strongly to disagree with to have their right to that speech. And I would expect and hope for the same thing back from them. Now that's a complicated sentence, which most people, I think, if they really thought about this, would find difficult to rationalize in modern society, But that's what freedom of speech is, and like I said, it's something that people don't seem to care about very much anymore, and I think that that's going to cause us incredible problems. Well, it is already. So I don't know. I don't know. It's complicated. It's difficult for me to speak to the intentions of Mgła. Other than that, I know them a bit, and like I said, nobody wants to hear a nuanced, complex argument which is based in, sort of rational observation of facts. But because people they're angry, they want to win. Everyone wants to fucking win everything. Everybody wants to feel empowered and part of a mob that is able to wield power. I mean, somebody sent me a message the other day randomly, and it said, how are you going to play this show next year with this band and this band and this band? And I didn't respond, but my response would have been, you should be more worried that there will even be a show.
Yeah.
Like, aren't you more worried about the situation the world is in now, where every artistic expression has been taken from society, and that the citizens of every nation state have handed over all of their freedoms to all of these states and institutions? That should be what's worrying you. Not the fucking, I don't know, Nocturnal Mortimer playing at a show in a country where you don't live and aren't going to go to. People are, again, to me, they're just not worried about the right things. I mean, trying to get heavy metal bands cancelled, fuck's sake, go and feed homeless people. You expend your energy on something more worthwhile than shooting, medium-sized fish in a tiny barrel culturally. That I think this energy could be better expended somewhere else. And also, like I said, right now, we should have greater worries in society. Like somebody says to me, as I said, you're playing the show, be worried that there is no shows for anyone is what you should be worrying about. But again, it's asking everybody to be, we're taking in so much information that our fucking lizard brains, our frontal cortex lobe is just, we're fried. We're fried as a species right now. And I don't know how we climb down off that fucking
just a wee bit to push back, because when I listened to your podcast about cancel culture and the term freedom of speech, there's a line in the sand for me, and this is again back to the between 1 and 10. There's 2 through 9. You know, you don't. There's not just those two options, black and white. There is a grey area and some nuance. Now, if you're telling me that you're going to take the stage at my event and you're going to have a fucking swastika backdrop, or you're going to go up there and tell somebody that you're better than them because you only like women, or because the colour of your skin, or because your sexuality, that's not acceptable to me. That's where my line's drawn. Now, I'm not going to go onto Twitter and try and cancel anyone else. What I'm saying is you're not welcome at my event. But that's
sure.
That's what it is. I'm not trying to... So, yeah. But when you talk about freedom of speech, does that in your head, is a line drawn where, to a certain degree, where the law is drawn, i.e. breach of the peace, defamation?
Yeah, I mean, when I do say that, I mean, we do have to be sort of clever and nuanced and intellectual about it, in the sense, I suppose. Well, I was more talking about, I mean, in my head, what I was considering was the ability to write books for lecturers to go to colleges and speak. I wasn't necessarily thinking of somebody doing that in your venue. Of course, that's your festival. It's up to you who you book, who you pull off the stage for something you disagree with. Of course, that's your prerogative as somebody who's booked that space. I kind of meant it more in my head, with stuff like, Jermaine Greer being cancelled from going and speaking in colleges and that kind of stuff, or I suppose that's what was in my head when I meant it. I suppose it comes back to this, are you allowed to scream fire in a crowded place argument, even though that the origins of that statement are not what people think it is. But yeah, I mean, I think that you've used the most extreme example in a sense, but it's your prerogative. Obviously, that's your festival that you've booked. And now, whether somebody should be allowed to do that with all of that in a venue they book to the people that they want to do that to, that's another question, It's, I suppose the fact is that it's very complicated, and at least if it's very complicated, then it should require a complicated discussion, I suppose.
Yes.
Which, it's not something that most people want to have. Now, it's I just tend to think that the alternative to freedom of speech is something something greater and darker, that only if you've traveled to some places in the world where it isn't part of society that people can understand exactly, or looked into history or whatever. And that is for me, that freedom is a cornerstone of, I suppose, Western enlightened society or something like this.
Yeah, believe me, listen, I grew up in, calling it working class would be overstating it, because no one had jobs. So I grew up around some fucking unsavoury folk and violence and in a pretty fucking rundown bit of Glasgow. But I have to say that 40 hours where some anonymous person was dictating to me how I should react and think, and what I could say and what I couldn't say, and what I should do, because they were basically dictating what should happen at the festival. This band should be cancelled, the left-leaning band should be given stall space, which I already agreed to before even speaking to them. If anybody ever wants to bring any sort of that literature, then bash on, And that 40 hours, I was like, fuck, man, if this is, imagine living in this state, this authoritarian sort of, I don't want to go, I don't want to play it like I was fucking and some dictator fan, but it was the worst experience I had. It's the most helpless I felt about a situation. And the reason I bring up my upbringing, because if I had a fallout with somebody as a teenager, I could punch them in the face, or they could punch me in the face. This was a strange losing sleep at night. Like, some faceless person at the other end of the internet is trying to cancel something that I put 15 years into, because for buying a story that someone else is desperate for them is selling to them, you know, and that was, I felt a bit helpless for a bit. I was sticking to my guns regardless, but I felt a bit helpless about the whole situation.
I think that it also speaks to the anonymous nature of the internet, in that anybody can really realistically accuse anyone of anything. And because we've had, as I said, we've been inculcated into this way of living for a decade, 15 years, that anybody can just tip and fire it off. And there's no immediate repercussions, as you would have said. In the real world, there would have been a repercussion. As you said, somebody on your estate calls you this, that, and the other, you knock around their gaff and go, oi, you know, let's have a fucking word. But that's an old-fashioned way of solving arguments. I mean, I'm from Dublin. That's the way it would have been in Dublin as well. But the anonymous nature of the internet encourages people to do and say things that they wouldn't normally, from either side of this polarized spectrum. And again, like, I think that, again, the middle ground is just something that nobody really wants. Like I said this in the podcast, is that moderate man says reasonable thing isn't a headline. It's not clickbait for anybody. No. Nobody invests it doesn't mean anything to anybody, because nobody reads that. Everything has to be screamed at the loudest volume, and everyone has to take everyone else's impulses at their worst possible context. Every joke, it's like saying that, it's like saying to a comedian, I don't believe that any of your jokes are jokes, and they're only intended to cause harm to the person that they're, or to the object of the joke. It's like saying that there can be no nuance, no humor, no ulterior meaning of anything. Everything is always the worst intentions. And if you create a society like that, like I said, expect it to come back to you. You know, I mean, that's the thing that I think people. I've often said this to friends of mine who have in the past tacitly supported, maybe, I don't like this band either. I said, well, listen, you may not like Taka or whatever coming to this, that to your city or your town or whatever, but if you support them not coming, I guarantee you that it doesn't stop there. It's going to be a band you like next, or it doesn't stop with the authors you don't like who aren't allowed to speak. Authoritarianism eventually, by its very nature, or this kind of thing, this cancel culture, eats itself, and nothing is ever pure enough. So people need to stop and think, like, if I support this tacitly, the thing that I like eventually in 6 months or a year or 18 months, they'll come, whoever they are, they'll come for that as well. And then you're left with no space to maneuver for.
And it's so true. And the irony of, like, I want to clarify one point, in just so people don't feel that their emails were dismissed. 2 people on Twitter, and I want to say that my experience of all this is only Twitter, not Facebook. Okay. Not Instagram, not in real life, definitely. Yeah. I received 2 emails that said that they weren't happy with the Mgła booking. Then what had happened, they'd done a podcast with the English band Svalbard. They'd left their record label. There was allegations made against the record's owner, sexual assaults. But exactly the reason I'm telling you this is because what happened is this band has spent their entire career singing about rights for women, revenge porn, just stand up feminism. And what you got is these people said, 3 years ago we sent your band Instagram page a message saying that this guy was a wronging 3 years ago, and since then we've boycotted you. So and you're like, fuck me, and talk about that. I had a chat with Serena about this, the vocalist and guitarist, and she made that point as well, the snake eating itself. It's like, you're never pure enough. You're pure enough today, but someone is going to be purer than you, and when you don't meet their requirements, now you're the one now. They're the 10, you're the one. There's, again, and that's what happened to me. I try not to be tribal about these situations, but I thought, when, as you say, the end of the world, and we're out there, I would be in the Antifa side. That would be me. That's my politics. I agree with 90% of what everything these guys are saying. And now I've been a target of Antifa. And I'm like, well, I'm a wee bit like, I'll think a wee bit more next time, because I wasn't pure enough. You know, I booked 300 bands and one didn't meet their requirements, and suddenly I was the Nazi. So I make sure that someone else doesn't become my Nazi, like, because they didn't meet my requirement, despite a fucking long history of sharing the same politics.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of how it goes for everybody from every side. Eventually, I don't know. I mean, for me, it's. I've always tried to have rational, reasoned debates, arguments, to try and as you've heard in the podcast, at least to my mind, try and get my head around both sides of an argument. But I get that. I like I said at the beginning of our segment about this, when something ceases to be an object of reason and becomes an article of faith, it's very difficult for somebody who has no faith to argue against that. So I think that's what essentially, you know, what happens. It's complicated. It's complicated. I mean, right now, I think people from either side should be more worried about other things, realistically. But it's a murky place to be, because we're on the cusp of technology that allows anybody to take any image and put any words in your mouth, and we're on the cusp of filter technology that can place anything in my mouth that I say, and it's one of the things I would say to people is that sometimes on Twitter, do you know if that's a bot or a real person? Is it something that's designed in order to agitate the situation, to cause to sow derision and sow unrest in society? I mean, why not? But also, as I said, we're on the cusp of anybody being allowed to more or less take anybody's image and put them saying anything. Who will know anything in 18, 24 months, 3 years, when anybody can literally place anyone anywhere saying anything? I think people are going to have to understand that trying to rationalize that will lead to total madness.
Yeah.
So either you let it go and try and exert your energies into something that, you know, something better, or we're going to keep plowing this furrow until everyone is so polarized. Hey, look, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose my mental health check would be to anyone listening, and we'll end on Twitter is, well, firstly, don't go there. Don't keep off Twitter. Then the reason that is, firstly, the point you made about the bot. I hope you'd seen the Twitter went into meltdown because an Amazon bot had replied to say about the territory in Northern Ireland being Ireland, and everyone lost their fucking mind. But like, that's fair enough. You can get that first bit and everybody get in and say, no, please, you don't know your history, and direct messaging fucking Jeff Bezos and all that nonsense. But then it got to the point that one guy had said a comment, like, this is me peeping my head into Twitter for 5 minutes, and you're like, Jesus, what's happening here? And one guy was saying, this could cause wars, Jeff Bezos. And the response from the bot was, thank you for the feedback, we'll take that in mind. And then people were retweeting that as if there was an actual human they were dealing with. And you're like, can you not see that you've got yourself so worked up about the situation, you're arguing with a fucking robot?
Yeah, I would recommend that people would just delete their Twitter. I think just get off Twitter is the best thing that you can do. I mean, again, this strange situation that we're in, I understand it. People are online all the time now. They're online way more than they were, and they're being fed more and more stuff to keep them outraged, because we share more, we click more, we stay on the platforms more when we're angry and outraged. I get it. People are losing their minds, but I think that we have to have some kind of personal discipline with these things, unless we are going to go mad. And one of them would be, unless you're using it for business purposes, even for a band, I don't think Twitter makes any fucking difference anymore. It's pointless for a band, unless you're already a huge band and you use it like Nick Holmes does and makes, you know, funny sarcastic comments and whatever. He does it very well. But for most bands, it means nothing. You're not selling any more merch because of Twitter. It doesn't make any sense for bands anymore. And I think for people's mental health, they need to clamber down off this fucking crazy scaffold they're on, and just try and do something human instead.
Yeah, absolutely. On that fucking gem of wisdom. Listen, thanks very much, Alan. Your podcast's great. Your band's fucking better. I'm looking forward to you being wrong and us getting some fucking live music at some point.
Yeah, and I really do say that in that people should take the podcast with a pinch of black humor, and that I really do, when I do say that, I do really hope that I'm wrong, and that in 6 months somebody can poke me in the ribs and go, "See, you were going mad," and I'll go, "Yeah, okay."
Of course.
Listen,
I look forward to having you back at Damnation, and we'll definitely catch up for a pint that time. All right, big chap.
Me too. All right, Chief.
Thank you.